Welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, 8 billion and counting as the global population hits another milestone. We'll examine what it could mean for the climate. With just 3 full days left to go at COP27, we'll look at what might make and, more importantly, not make the summit's final statement. And how the world's 15 biggest meat and dairy companies are responsible for more methane than most large countries. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, the global population officially passed 8 billion people today, amid increasing fears over what the impact of the sheer number of people on Earth means for the planet and its climate. That number has more than doubled in the past 50 years. In 1972, it was just 3.8 billion. But despite that, the population growth rate has actually been slowing over the past 6 decades. Let's take a look. It peaked in 1964 at more than 2.2% every year. But it's now less than 1% every year, a significant drop. The UN projects the population will peak at around 10.4 billion people in the 2080s and remain at that level until 2100. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, around 738 million people already live without adequate food supplies, and the population is projected to jump by a further 95% by the middle of the century. Now, our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, joins us from Lagos. Now, that's the most populated city in the most populated African country, Nigeria. Yusra, good to see you. What impact is this population growth having on the planet and indeed Africa, which is already so impacted by climate change?
I mean, the two are inextricably linked, and we've met communities here that have been affected by both. Just this year, Nigeria has seen the worst flooding in decades, more than 600 people killed, more than 1 million homeless, and it's affected 34 out of 36 states here. But we're now in Lagos, and Lagos, as you said, is the most populated city in Africa, but it's also a group of islands connected by bridges in the Atlantic Ocean. And we've met waterfront communities here who are suffering from lack of affordable living space, facing demolition by the government, but also rising sea levels that could see Lagos disappear by 2050.
Extraordinary facts and very stark images. Yusra, thank you so much for that update. Thank you. In some of the other climate stories making the news today, here are the headlines. Methane emissions produced by 15 of the world's biggest meat and dairy companies surpass those of several of the world's biggest countries. That's according to a new study. Now, a report for the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy and Changing Markets Foundation calculated that the companies emitted more methane than Russia, Canada and Australia, and more than 80% of the EU's entire methane footprint. That's quite something. Methane, which is mainly emitted by cows, traps heat 80 times more than carbon dioxide. The head of Scottish Power has warned it might reconsider its investment plans if the government imposes a windfall tax on power generators in Thursday's autumn statement. Scottish Power is one of the country's biggest green energy companies by virtue of the wind farms it owns. And Keith Anderson told The Times any windfall levy should provide tax breaks for investment in renewables, and his company could slow or reduce its UK investment if any levy is as tough as that imposed on oil and gas producers. The Environment Minister, Lord Goldsmith, has got into a row on social media with Extinction Rebellion after being pursued by an 11-year-old climate activist at COP27. Lysipriya Kangujam, who you may have seen interviewed on Sky News last week, was asking him about Just Stop Oil protesters who were arrested in the UK. Extinction Rebellion then accused Lord Goldsmith's aide of pushing Lysipriya. He responded on Twitter by accusing the organisation of bullying a civil servant who can't answer back. Now, staying with COP27, and we're getting to the sharp end of the summit. There are only 3 scheduled days to go, but the possibility remains that it could go into extra time, as COP26 did last year in Glasgow. Politicians and negotiators have now begun the attempt to find common ground for a deal. But the summit's Egyptian hosts today acknowledged many sticking points remain unresolved, with the possibility of this COP extending into the weekend now being openly discussed. Well, Sky's climate reporter, Victoria Seabrook, joins me now from Sharm el-Sheikh. Victoria, good to see you again. Just 3 full days left to go until the end of COP. And why are talks on 1.5 degrees of warming now hanging in the balance?
Yes, that's exactly it. So you'll remember that 1.5 degrees, that is the crucial goal, which up until relatively recently, there has been global consensus on that we need to try to limit warming to 1.5 degrees to avoid the very worst impacts of climate breakdown. But now there is a big fight going on about whether that even makes it into the final deal, the cover text, which is the key political document that comes out of these talks, and it kind of sets the direction and the mood for the rest of the world to kind of get in line behind other industries and so on. And I've been speaking to senior diplomats, negotiators, and they've been telling us that it's countries'
goal
looks like is even realistic, is even achievable. Today,
Victoria, we lost you briefly there, so I'm just going to either let you continue with what you were saying, or if you were nearing the end of it, also bring us up to speed on what was also being discussed at COP, which is the fact that there's not only a battle over the text, but over the whole narrative of this summit. Tell us more about that.
yes, exactly. So I was just going to say that it's countries like India and China who have been questioning whether 1.5 degrees is even achievable. But as you say, there's a battle not just for the text, but a battle for the narrative going on, a bit of war of words. And so we've got countries briefing now, everyone trying to position themselves as a climate leader. It's quite remarkable where we've come in the last few years, that now no one wants to be seen as the climate laggard. So we're being told that it's India and China who are disrupting things a bit. But actually, if you were India and China, you might say, well, hang on a minute. Yes, we're big emitters. China is the biggest at the moment. India is third. But actually, when you look at those emissions per head, it's much smaller. And the developed world has actually sort of eaten up the budget for the emissions that we can get away with if we are going to limit warming down to 1.5 degrees. And let's not forget that places like India have been forced to burn more coal year because of the gas crisis. They've effectively been outbid for their gas by Europe. So it does make things harder for places like India. That doesn't wash with very vulnerable nations, small island states, for example, who say we have to do absolutely everything right now.
OK, Victoria, thanks so much for the update. We realise there's so much detail to stay across, but it really is so important. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And before we go, a reminder that Tom Heap will be presenting a special climate show this weekend from Sharm el-Sheikh, focusing on the end of COP27 and what, if anything, gets achieved. And you can watch this on Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 in the afternoon, or again at 7:30 in the evening. And that is all from us for today. You can join us again at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for watching.